They told me they were tapped out, maxed credit cards, dipping into savings just to cover utilities. Nothing left at the end of the month. That's what my parents said in the spring of 2021, when my son was 8 years old and the doctors told us his kidneys were failing. I believed them. I believed them for 3 years. Until I found the deed. My son's name is Mason. He was the kind of kid who collected rocks, not because anyone told him to, but because he genuinely thought every single one was interesting. He'd come home from school with his pockets so full they'd drag his jeans down, and he'd line them up on the windowsill in whatever order made sense to him that day. By color, by size, by which one looked the most like a dinosaur. He had explanations for all of them. He always had an explanation for everything. He started getting tired in the fall of 2020. Not regular kid tired. The kind of tired where you sit down on the couch to watch one cartoon and wake up 3 hours later and it's dark outside. His teacher called me because he'd fallen asleep at his desk twice in 1 week. I took him to the pediatrician expecting an iron deficiency, maybe mono. Something manageable. It wasn't manageable. His creatinine levels were through the roof. His kidneys, both of them, were showing signs of scarring that shouldn't have been there in an 8-year-old body. They referred us to a pediatric nephrologist at the Children's Hospital 40 minutes away. And that doctor referred us to another specialist. And that specialist sat across from me in a beige office, with a plant in the corner, and said the words I have not been able to fully unhear since. Focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. Stage 4 chronic kidney disease. Likely trajectory toward end-stage renal failure within 2 to 3 years. My husband Dale grabbed my hand under the table. I remember staring at the plant and thinking somebody needs to water that thing. It's going yellow at the edges. My brain did that thing where it finds something completely irrelevant to focus on because the real thing is too big to look at directly. We drove home mostly quiet. Mason was at my mother-in-law's house. Dale and I sat in the driveway for a long time before either of us could go inside. The thing about a diagnosis like that is that the grief doesn't hit all at once. It comes in waves, and sometimes the wave is huge and crashes over you at 2 in the morning when you're trying to read about immunosuppressant medications on your phone. And sometimes it's small and quiet. Like when you're packing his lunch and you wonder if he'll need dialysis by the time he starts middle school. We told family within the week. My parents, my mom and my dad, both retired, living in the same house in Fairfax, Virginia. They'd owned for 30 years, drove down to see us. My mom cried and held Mason and made his favorite pasta. My dad sat with Dale on the back porch and talked. It felt like family. It felt like we weren't alone. I asked them, that first visit, whether they'd be able to help at all financially. Not to cover everything, just anything. Because the treatment costs were already stacking up fast, the specialist co-pays the labs every 6 weeks the medication. Dale worked in HVAC, self-employed, which meant our insurance was decent but not great, and every extraordinary claim felt like a negotiation. I was a school librarian. We were comfortable, not flush. There was no cushion for something like this. My dad said, "You know we'd help if we could, sweetheart." His voice was heavy. "But we're really stretched right now. The roof last year, your mom's hip surgery, we barely got our heads back above water." I nodded. I didn't push. They were my parents. They wouldn't lie about something like that. The next 2 years were the hardest of my life. Mason responded to medication initially. The disease slowed but didn't stop. By spring of 2022, we knew he was heading toward dialysis. By summer, the transplant conversation started. By fall, the word list entered our vocabulary in the way that changes everything: waiting list, national registry, compatibility testing, living donor evaluation. The evaluation process for living donors costs money before insurance gets involved. There's a workup, there are logistics, there's coordination. We'd set up a fundraising page, the kind you feel embarrassed about until you realize you don't have a choice. and strangers were generous. Former students of mine. People from our church. A woman 3 towns over who said her nephew had gone through the same thing, and she just wanted to help. Hundreds of small donations that meant so much I had to stop reading the messages, because I'd cry and then Mason would see me crying and get scared. My parents donated $200. I thanked them and meant it. My younger brother Garrett donated nothing. He said he was thinking of us. Garrett is 4 years younger than me, works in commercial real estate in Northern Virginia, drives a car that costs more than Dale's work truck, and takes a vacation every winter. I knew things were better for him than for us, but I figured maybe he just wasn't in a position to give. I didn't want to make it weird. He's my brother. Mason went on dialysis in January 2023. 3 times a week, 4 hours a session. We rearranged our entire life around it. I dropped to part-time at the library. Dale shifted his client schedule to cover the days I couldn't drive. Mason, who was 10 by then, handled it with a steadiness that honestly scared me a little. Kids shouldn't have to be that steady about something like that. He brought his rock collection in a little bag and organized them on the tray table while the machine ran. I found a compatible living donor in March 2023. Me. I was a match, not perfect, but strong enough that the transplant team was optimistic. The plan was set. Pre-surgical workup for both of us. Target date in late May. Then our insurance sent a letter. I won't go into the full bureaucratic nightmare of what happened, because if I start, I'll never stop. The short version is that the insurance company disputed coverage of a specific component of the pre-transplant recipient workup, a required cardiac clearance for Mason, on the basis that it was not a covered diagnostic under the current plan terms. The appeal process would take 60 to 90 days. The transplant team said we couldn't proceed without that clearance on file. 60 to 90 days of delay on dialysis at Mason's stage was not nothing. The out-of-pocket cost to skip the insurance fight and just pay, $18,500. $18,500. I called my parents from the hospital parking garage, sitting in the car, Mason inside with Dale. I explained the situation. I asked if there was any way at all, they could help us bridge this, even alone. Even part of it. My mom's voice was soft and sorry. Honey, I wish we could. We really do. Dad looked at everything last week. We just don't have it. What about a home equity line? The house has been paid off for years. We looked into that too. There are fees and we're on fixed income now. We can't take on more. Mom? This is Mason. There was a pause. I know, sweetheart. I know it is. We're praying for him every single day. I drove home and sat in the driveway again. Dale came out after a few minutes and sat on the front steps. He didn't say anything for a while. We'll figure it out, he said finally. How? He didn't answer because there wasn't an answer yet. We updated the fundraising page. We wrote about the insurance situation, honestly, because people deserve to know what was actually happening. It went further than we expected. A local news segment picked it up, something about the insurance system and pediatric transplants, and suddenly donations were coming in from people we'd never heard of, from states we'd never been to. A family in Oregon, a veteran in Tennessee, someone who just left a comment that said for Mason's rocks and nothing else. We raised enough. Not with a lot of room, but enough. The cardiac clearance got paid for. The insurance fight got won eventually, months later after the transplant was already done. We got a check back that we used to pay down the medical debt we'd accumulated over the previous 2 years. Mason came through the surgery beautifully. He was in the hospital for 11 days. I was there for 12 because they kept me an extra night for observation. Dale slept in that vinyl recliner chair 4 nights in a row until the nurses told him they had a family room down the hall with a real bed, and he cried a little when they told him that, which is one of the only times I've ever seen him cry. The first time Mason walked the hallway post-surgery, slow, hunched over a little, dragging his IV pole. He had his little rock bag hanging from the pole. A nurse asked him about it and he explained, very seriously, the entire organizational system. She listened to the whole thing. We came home in June. By September, he was back in school. By October, he was playing soccer again, badly and joyfully. By December, I had started to exhale for the first time in 3 years. That December, I was helping my mother-in-law sort through some boxes she'd been storing for us. Extra stuff we'd moved out of the house when we were trying to clear space during the worst of the medical chaos. One of the boxes had papers in it. Old papers, things I'd shoved in without looking. And in that box, under some old utility bills, was a piece of paper I had never seen before. It was a property record. A deed transfer. A house in Centerville, Virginia. A 4-bedroom colonial, assessed at $610,000, transferred to my brother Garrett and his wife in the spring of 2021. The grantors, the people who transferred the property, were my parents. Spring 2021. That was when I had first asked them for help. Before the dialysis. Before the insurance nightmare. When I had sat across from my mother at my kitchen table and she'd looked at me with soft eyes and said they were stretched thin and had nothing left. They had given my brother a house. Not helped with a down payment. Not co-signed a loan. Given him a house. A house. Free and clear. In the spring of the same year, their grandson was starting treatment for kidney failure. I sat down on the floor of my mother-in-law's spare room and I stayed there for a long time. I didn't call anyone. I didn't say anything to Dale that night. I just carried it around for 3 days, this thing that had no shape I recognized, this feeling that was too large and too specific at the same time. It wasn't just the money. It was the look on my mother's face. It was we're praying for him. It was my dad's voice going heavy and regretful. It was the performance of helplessness while they were literally signing over a $600,000 property to my brother. I hired a title company to pull the full record. I wanted to be sure. I was sure. I told Dale on a Thursday night after Mason was in bed. I showed him the document on my laptop. He read it twice. Then he closed the laptop and didn't say anything for a while. "Did Garrett know?" he finally said. "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what's worse." I called my brother the next day. I told him I'd found the deed and I needed him to help me understand what had happened. There was a long pause on his end. "That was their choice to make," he said. "Did you know they were refusing to help Mason while they were giving you that house?" Another pause. It wasn't really the same situation. I hung up. I didn't call my parents for 2 weeks. I used that time to figure out what I actually wanted to say, which took longer than 2 weeks to figure out, but I ran out of patience at that point. When I finally called, I said I needed to see them in person. My mom's voice went careful in the way it does when she knows something is coming. We met at their house on a Saturday afternoon. Mason was with Dale's mom. It was cold, the kind of gray December day that makes everything feel more final. I laid the document on their kitchen table. My mom started to say something about timing, about how it was different, about how the house had been part of an estate planning arrangement. My dad said they hadn't wanted to make me feel bad by telling me. He said they had always intended to do something for us too when things settled down. I asked them one question. I asked them if, at any point during the years, Mason was on dialysis, or during the insurance dispute, or during any of the fundraising, they had looked at what they had given my brother and considered reversing course. Neither of them answered. I didn't yell. I'm telling you this not because I'm proud of composure, but because I genuinely didn't have yelling in me. I was past that. I told them I had some things I needed them to hear, and then I said them. I told them that for 3 years, I had believed them. I had thanked them for the $200. I had never made them feel guilty for what they couldn't give because I thought they actually couldn't give it. I had watched strangers pay for my son's cardiac clearance while his own grandparents signed a deed. I told them I didn't need an apology, and I meant that. Not because I was being gracious, but because I didn't think an apology would mean anything coming from where we currently were. I told them I needed distance, and I needed it to be respected. My mother cried. My father looked at the table. I picked up the document and left. That was 14 months ago. What I didn't anticipate, what none of us anticipated, was what happened last spring. My brother Garrett has always been the healthiest person in the family. Runs, doesn't drink much, goes to his annual checkups. So when he called me in April, not my parents, me, directly, I expected it to be about them. Some family thing. Some request I was going to have to figure out how to handle. It wasn't about them. He'd been having symptoms for about 6 weeks. Fatigue, some joint pain, bruising easily. He'd gone to his doctor, then to a specialist, then to another specialist. The diagnosis was aplastic anemia. His bone marrow was failing to produce enough blood cells. It's rare. It's serious. The first-line treatment had not worked. His team was recommending a bone marrow transplant. He told me before he told our parents, which I think meant something, though I wasn't sure what. The compatibility testing process started immediately. His wife, their friends, our parents, all tested, none were a match. The national registry search was ongoing, but the coordinators were not optimistic about timeline given his specific markers. I got a call from his transplant coordinator in May. My sibling compatibility testing had been flagged. Would I be willing to come in for a full workup? I told her I needed a few days to think about it. She said she understood and she gave me her direct number. I sat with it. I'm not going to pretend I sat with it calmly. I cried in the shower 3 mornings in a row. I went for long walks. I had one very long conversation with Dale where neither of us told the other what to do because we both knew this was mine to carry. Here is what I kept coming back to. Mason almost didn't get his second chance because the people who could have helped chose not to. I knew what that felt like from the inside. I knew what it was like to be the parent in that waiting room. I knew what it felt like to watch your kid hooked up to a machine and think about odds and timelines and whether love was going to be enough. I didn't want to be them. That was the thing. It sounds simple and it wasn't. But it was also genuinely that simple. I didn't want to be the person who had the ability to help and looked at the numbers and the feelings and the history and chose the easier thing. I called the coordinator back. I said I would come in for the workup. I was a match. The surgery was scheduled for late July. In the weeks leading up to it, Garrett came to see me at home. Just him, without his wife, without our parents. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd confronted my parents with that deed, and he was quiet for a long time before he spoke. He told me he had known. Not from the beginning, not when the property transferred, but by the time the insurance dispute happened, when I had updated the fundraising page with the details, he had known they had assets they weren't offering. He had told himself it wasn't his place to say anything. He had told himself it was their money and their choice. He said he knew that wasn't good enough. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He said he didn't think he'd earned that yet. He said he'd been in therapy since January trying to figure out why he'd been so comfortable being their favorite that he'd never questioned the cost of it. I didn't say much. I offered him coffee. He accepted. We sat there for a while. The procedure was in late July. I was in the hospital for 2 days. The recovery was harder than I'd expected. Bone marrow donation isn't like giving blood. It's anesthesia and bone pain and fatigue that lingers for weeks. Dale took time off work. Mason, who was 11 now and understood more than I wanted him to, brought me a rock. Just one. He said he'd picked the best one. Garrett's body accepted the donation. His count started responding within the first 3 weeks, which his team called an unusually strong early response. He's been doing well. He has a long road still, monitoring and follow-up for years, but the trajectory is good. My parents called me the week after the procedure. My mother's voice was, I don't know how to describe it, compressed. Like she was holding something very tightly. She said she didn't have words for what I'd done. I told her I wasn't sure she needed to find them. She asked if we could talk. Really talk. All of us, together. She said they'd been in counseling, the two of them, and the counselor had helped them understand some things they had been unable to see before. I told her I appreciated that they were doing that work. I told her that at some point I would probably want to have that conversation, but I couldn't promise her when. And I needed her to be okay with that. She said okay. I don't know what comes next with my parents. I'm not ready to perform forgiveness for their comfort. I'm not there yet, and I don't know if I will be, and I've stopped making promises to myself about the timeline. What I know is that I chose not to let their choices define mine. I chose to be the person who shows up even when showing up is hard, even when the person who needs showing up for has not earned it, because that's the person I decided I am. Mason is 12 now. He's doing well. His numbers are stable. His energy is back. He's in that phase of middle school where everything is simultaneously the most embarrassing and the most hilarious thing that has ever happened. He still collects rocks. He upgraded his collection system to a spreadsheet this year, cross-referenced by mineral type and location found, which honestly I expected from him. The windowsill in his room is still full. I look at it sometimes and I think about what it cost to keep him here. Not just the money. Though that was real, and it was brutal, and I will never make peace with the fact that the system worked the way it did. I think about the strangers who donated. The woman in Oregon, the veteran in Tennessee, the person who wrote for Mason's Rocks. I think about how love showed up for us from people who owed us nothing. I think about what it means to be family when family turns out to be a more complicated word than you were raised to believe. I don't have a clean answer for any of it. I don't think I'm supposed to. But I showed up. And Mason is here. And some mornings that is everything. I've thought a lot about what kind of person I wanted to be when the moment came. Not in a general abstract way. I mean specifically in that hospital parking garage when I got the coordinator's call. Because that was the moment. That was the one where everything I'd been through either hardened into something ugly or stayed soft enough to still be useful. The thing about what my parents did, and I can say this now with some distance, is that it didn't just cost us money. It cost me my ability to trust my own family's grief. When my mother cried at Mason's bedside, I thought it was love. It was. I don't think it wasn't. But love without action is just a feeling people have about themselves. They felt terrible. They also didn't do anything. And those two things lived in them at the same time, comfortably, for years, while we fundraised in dollar increments from strangers. That's not a spiritual failing. That's a choice. A long, sustained, daily choice to look away from something they could see clearly. What I kept coming back to, those 3 days before I called the coordinator, was Mason. Not as motivation, not as a reason to be noble. Just him, specifically. The rock bag on the IV pole. The way he organized things into systems because systems gave him a sense of order when his body wasn't cooperating. He didn't get bitter. He got methodical. He found what he could control and he worked with it. I think I learned something from him about how to carry hard things. You don't carry them by pretending they're light. You carry them by figuring out what's actually yours to put down and what isn't. Garrett's illness wasn't his punishment for what my parents did. I want to be clear about that because I think it's important to be honest about cause and effect. Bad things happen to people who've made bad choices and to people who haven't. And the universe doesn't run a ledger the way we sometimes wish it did. What was true was simpler. He needed help. I was capable of giving it. And what I did with that was going to be a fact about me for the rest of my life. I didn't want to be someone who let their capacity for harm become the permission slip for mine. That's not weakness. I think people confuse those two things. They think holding your line means matching the other person's worst move. It doesn't. Holding your line means knowing who you are, even when who you are costs you something. I paid in bone pain and 2 hospital days and weeks of fatigue and the complicated, unresolved feeling of having saved someone who hasn't fully reckoned with what he knew and when he knew it. But I also got to look at Mason when he handed me that rock in my recovery room and know that the version of his mother he was watching was the version I'd chosen to be. My parents are doing their work. Garrett is doing his. I'm doing mine. None of it is finished. None of it has a clean ending. But I think that's what actual growth looks like. Not resolution. Just the continued effort to be someone you can live with, even when the people around you made it easier to become someone else entirely. Mason's spreadsheet has 47 entries now. He adds a location column this year. He's going to be okay. And some days that's the only metric that matters.